I met him 15 years ago. I was told there was nothing left. No reason, no conscience, no understanding, and even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, of good or evil, right or wrong. I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes.
It's Halloween Eve, everyone, and that means that I pretty much have to carry out my second Ranking the Franchise video. I didn't get around to doing as many videos for Halloween as I wanted to, but I figured I have to get this one done. This time we'll be ranking the Halloween franchise. Now, the big three in this genre, or unholy trinity, if you will, is usually recognized to be Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, and Michael Myers. And I'll just say it at the top, I would rank them in that order, and I don't find Myers to be as interesting, cool, or creepy as the other two. But that certainly doesn't mean that I don't appreciate the Halloween franchise. For as long as I can remember, I've always watched at least one or two of the Halloween movies every year in October. And being holiday specific certainly sets the Halloween franchise apart from the others, although you could say Friday the 13th is also holiday specific, but it's a much smaller holiday, and you tell me what it actually has to do with the day of Friday the 13th. I haven't figured it out, and I've watched that franchise like hundreds of times, so. There are 12 movies to dig into here, and also 5 distinct timelines that I'm not going to go into great detail about because they're all confusing as hell. But without any further ado, let's just get straight to the movies. Coming in dead last on my list is Halloween Resurrection, which was released in 2002, and somehow still manages to feel more dated than the very 90s movie that came before it, Halloween H2O. This is such a bad movie. The premise sucks, the acting, for the most part, blows, and the camera work is found footage webcam quality for large portions of the movie, because again, the premise sucks. And it starts out okay. They actually managed to work their way out of the whole Michael was just beheaded in the last movie, so how is he back thing, in a way that was creative and made sense, even if it does really hurt the ending of a much better Halloween movie in the process. But then they go and decide to, spoiler alert, kill off Laurie Strode in the intro, and never ever mention the fact that her son was still alive, or anything related to the story of the previous movie. Apparently this isn't entirely their fault though, because I guess Jamie Lee Curtis hated the idea of a sequel to H2O, and only appeared in this one because her contract demanded it. It was a stipulation that she agreed to just so she could shoot H2O. However, she demanded that her character be killed off in the intro here. She also wasn't all that kind in the movie either, having stated in interviews that she considers this movie to be a joke, and John Carpenter, the original creator of Halloween, would also later say that this movie makes him cringe, and for good reason. But hey, those are all things that they could recover from with good writing and a new good idea for the franchise. Unfortunately, there was no good writing here, and the new idea for the direction in the franchise was terrible. Turning the rest of the movie into a reality show where strangers are locked in the Myers house, which, by the way, is not big enough to take up a whole night. This is not a haunted prison or something, it's a small house. And then they decide that the big moment that they should build to throughout the movie should be Busta Rhymes fighting Michael Myers with karate. Busta Rhymes' acting here, if you can call it acting even, bounces back and forth between somewhat passable and what the hell are you trying to do here? This wouldn't even work in one of the Leprechaun sequels. But at least Busta Rhymes is memorable. Tyra Banks isn't much better, and none of the reality contestants are interesting or memorable. The online romance subplot between the college student and the high school student doesn't work either, since it's not an absurd 80s comedy movie. When the main character is relying on her underage online boyfriend to tell her where Michael is in the house since he's watching at home with a bunch of poorly written idiots, okay, that portrayal of teens may actually be the most accurate aspect of the entire movie. The writers can't even use that effectively. When Michael Myers is standing right behind her, he just types out, "He's in the house." Because apparently he wanted a mindless jump scare too. Dude, you were still a kid, but look at your hair and look at your friends. This is seriously the best chance you are ever going to have with a hot college girl who has no confidence, and you're going to suck this badly? And I try not to give away too many spoilers here, but again, I have to bring up the fact that Busta Rhymes uses karate on Michael Myers, and it fucking works. Despite not being an actual actor, despite having a total sleazeball character who uses others to get rich in a reality TV scheme that doesn't make sense at all, Busta Rhymes gets to be the guy that kicks Michael Myers' ass decisively. I'm not sure if any of the other major horror icons, Jason, Freddy, or even, like I said, the freaking Leprechaun, have ever been disrespected to that degree. That being said, there are a lot of Halloween fans who love this movie, and God bless them. All movies need someone to love them. And at number 11, we have Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. And if there's one thing you can say about the Rob Zombie version of Halloween, it's that it's certainly polarizing. And man, I hated this movie the first time I saw it. And honestly, I was kind of dreading doing this list because I knew that I should probably rewatch it if I was going to talk about it at all. Upon rewatching it, I still hate it, but it wasn't quite as bad as I remember it being. There are a ton of problems, and one of the biggest is that it actively undoes so much of the groundwork of the first movie, which emphasized realism in regards to Myers and seemed to make such an effort to steer away from the supernatural elements of the franchise. Here, Rob Zombie falls back on some of the worst tendencies in the franchise. Michael's superhuman strength and impossible stamina. Seriously, how nutritious is Dog? Is turned up to 11 here, and he seems to have an inner GPS psychic power that lets him know where Laurie and anyone she's friends with at all are at all times. I'm also pretty sure he teleports at least 3 times in this movie. Oh, and apparently he can cloak like the Predator now, because there is no way that these people can't see or hear a 6'8" giant before he's killing them. He hides behind a small tree at one point, which is fine, but the cop he sneaks up on is on that side of the tree too. Don't they do some type of vision test to get accepted into the police academy? Now, since Dr. Loomis and Laurie Strode are such important characters to this franchise, I should talk about their depictions here in Zombies movies. Scout Taylor Compton does an admirable job as Laurie for the most part. I don't get her a lot of times, but her acting is fine, and she's game. Malcolm McDowell as Loomis, though, well, it's clear that neither McDowell nor Zombie understood this character, and McDowell had said in interviews that he had never seen any of the Halloween movies, apparently. And while I don't like Loomis in the first movie, he's at least somewhat likable and understandable there. But in the time between the first movie and this one, he just turned into a total son of a bitch who isn't fun to watch at all, and McDowell lacks the over-exaggerated charm of the late Donald Pleasance. My biggest problem with this movie, however, is Sherry Moon Zombie and that goddamned white horse. Rob Zombie is all about realism, violence, and curse words. He's not an art house director, and this sure as shit isn't an art house movie, so Sherry Moon's character, Michael's dead mother, just does not belong in this one. There was no reason to have her back for Halloween 2, and if there was, maybe a quick scene or two in flashbacks or something like that, or maybe it could have worked if she's just a figment of Michael's imagination. But making Laurie see her too? That makes no sense. And making Laurie see the young Michael, who should not have been recast, he looks like the middle Hanson brother and it's distracting, while grown Michael is standing there too. Look, there just shouldn't be 2 Michael Myers on screen at the same time when we're talking about Rob Zombie. So the fact that she sees him means that I guess Michael has psychic powers and can project what he sees into the mind of his sister. Well, either that or his stripper mother's ghost is real, which isn't that much more dumb. Ironically, I read that Rob Zombie didn't want to do a sequel. He had a miserable experience making the first Halloween movie, and he only came back to direct because he didn't want someone else to, quote, ruin my vision. The rest of that quote should have been, when I can do that myself. Coming in at number 10 is Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. In this one, Dr. Loomis has mellowed considerably in retirement and isn't quite as animated or trigger-happy as he was in the last few movies. And the great Paul Rudd plays a now grown-up Tommy Doyle, the little boy from the original Halloween. About Tommy Doyle, though, Tommy is odd, and it makes sense for Tommy to be odd, I guess, but not this odd. Then again, everyone in this movie is a little odd. Some of it is just bad acting, and some of that is just a really poor script, with the story taking a hard right turn into druid curses and symbols. And I'll be honest, the story in this one has never made much sense to me, but basically Michael has the curse of Thorn, which is a curse that is placed on one member of a family by a freaking constellation that can appear on Halloween night. For the druids, the family member afflicted with this curse would sacrifice, through murder, all of the other members of the family, and through these sacrificial offerings, it would save the larger community from things like droughts and plague, but not demonic guys in masks who kill everyone that they are not related to. He has a much easier time killing those he is not related to than he does the ones he's related to, okay? So I don't know, is Michael doing this for the greater good then? Is he like helping, farmers' crops in Haddonfield, Illinois? But anyways, there's a cult in this one, the Cult of Thorn, who do believe this doctrine, and turns out that they've kidnapped Jamie Lloyd and Michael Myers and have now forced a teenage Jamie to have Michael's son. Now, just keep in mind, Jamie Lloyd is Michael Myers' niece. So they have forced them into incest because, what the fuck? Why do they have a baby? Why do they need a baby? Is the baby to help control Michael? If they believe this prophecy or whatever, shouldn't they have locked Jamie in a room with Michael and let him kill his last living relative so the crops in fucking Illinois would taste better or some shit? And how is the baby going to help them control Michael Myers when he's trying to kill the baby and he's going to kill anyone who has control of the baby? Anyway, I guess they just like the darkness of it all and they want the evil to continue, but again, it would have continued anyhow, so I don't know why these assholes are involved. Then you find out that the head asshole is a learned doctor, played by William Hurt, and he's telling some other little kid who's living in the Myers house now to kill his family and not eat his freaking broccoli, and how he should kill his granddad for being an even bigger asshole than these robe-wearing cult assholes. Look, this thing is a hot mess, and I need someone to explain it to me like I'm 5 years old. The one thing that I should love the movie for is Paul Rudd. But even Paul Rudd is comically bad in this movie. He smiles when he's scared. He walks around carrying Jamie's baby like he's freaking Quasimodo. He also names the baby Steven. Who names a baby Steven like that they pick up at a bus stop in a cabinet? How is this not the worst movie in this franchise? The first of Rob Zombie's pair of Halloween movies was released in 2007. And I'm just going to start with this question. Did anyone want this? I mean, did anyone really want to have Michael Myers essentially downgraded to standard/normal serial killer status? Did we need to see his terrible upbringing, which is presented in such an over-the-top manner that it kind of makes it a little less believable? Did we need it to be spelled out for us for over half an hour of the movie's runtime? Was there a contingent of fans out there who were like, you know what's missing from the Halloween franchise? 8 million curse words, Michael as a kid, and Rob Zombie's wife. And it sounds like I'm bashing on her, but that's not to say she's bad here at all. She actually offers up one of the best performances in the movie, actually, in my opinion. But still, you get the point. None of this was really necessary. And it's less scary than the idea that Michael just is bad or, he's evil incarnate. That his motives aren't meant to be understood. That being said, at least this movie tries something new, and that does actually make some kind of sense. It's actually more logical than most other movies in the franchise, to be honest, and some of the visuals and kills are among the most intense in the series as well, with former pro wrestler Tyler Mane playing the role of Michael very convincingly. And just on a Tyler Mane side note, the other role that he's probably most famous for is that of Sabretooth in the first X-Men movie. For being a remake of the original Halloween, there really aren't as many callbacks and Easter eggs as you'd probably expect, considering that this is such a legendary franchise. Danielle Harris is the only cast member with ties to any of the previous movies who appears in the film, as she played young Jamie Lloyd in parts 4 and 5. And she does well here as Annie, and the decision to go topless for an extended period of time in this movie was actually a conscious effort on her part so that she could be seen as an adult actress instead of just little Jamie Lloyd. And her strategy paid off as she began to get offers for new roles based on her performance here in this movie. And let's just be clear, this is not a bad movie. It's better than it gets credit for a lot of the time. A lot of people just love to hate on Rob Zombie Halloween for some reason. And like I said, I'm not a big fan. I don't love this movie, but it's not bad. If Rob Zombie could just resist his impulse for vulgarity and inappropriateness and use more subtlety, I do actually think that he could be a really good filmmaker. And this movie could have been top 5 on this list, but as it is, it's not. And at number 8, we have Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. And this movie has its fair share of good elements, but for the most part, it's really weighed down by some terrible decisions and direction that just never really seem to understand the franchise or even the holiday of Halloween itself, actually. Part of the problem is that this movie just confuses its audience right off the bat by basically ignoring the final scene of part 4 and trying to convince the audience that Jamie stabbing her adopted mother and reenacting her uncle's childhood murdering spree was no big deal, really. She's just in a children's hospital. And Dr. Loomis just shows up like he didn't just try to shoot her because he saw in her eyes the exact same thing that he saw in Michael Myers' eyes when he was a little boy. Instead of showing the ending of the last film, it shows a scene before the ending. And like I said, that's what confuses everyone, because it's like, did that really even happen? You have to really pay attention to even know if it happened. But also, let's be clear here, that is not the worst decision that this movie makes. By far, the worst decision is that they have the character of Rachel, the well-liked protector of Jamie from part 4, back in this one for no real reason other than to just write her off, apparently, I guess. And they replace her with a character in Tina that has no real reason to be in that role, and who is way too over-the-top fun girl to assume Rachel's mantle convincingly. And the over-the-top thing is also definitely not specific to the character of Tina, because most of these characters are either really annoying, or they just don't seem real at all. This movie doesn't even get the Michael standing there looking creepy in bushes or shadows thing right, as they have him awkwardly just standing out in public in full light in the background a couple of times in this movie. It comes off, in a couple of times anyway, that Michael is like an extra who missed his mark, and now he doesn't know how to get out of the frame. And also, Loomis is now completely, fully unhinged, using Jamie as bait towards the end of the movie, and there's more than one scene in the movie where he looks like he's just going to start beating the shit out of this little girl. And one final terrible decision that I'm going to critique here is this. Mute characters, especially in horror, are almost always going to be annoying. So why they would put that handicap on Danielle Harris, a child actor who proved in the previous movie that she could act just fine if allowed, was just dumb and unnecessary. It seems like the only reason they went this direction was just so that they could seemingly say, see, she was affected by the ending of the last movie. That didn't happen, maybe. We're not sure. Add it all up, and it's not a surprise that this movie made less money than any other film in the entire series, even including the one that didn't have Michael Myers in it. Speaking of the one that didn't have Michael Myers in it, Halloween 3 is widely considered the most disastrous movie in the franchise, so it might come as a surprise that it's not last on my list. I mean, it did almost kill the entire franchise. But the movie was really only a disaster because of the fact that not having Michael Myers in a Halloween movie was just a disastrous decision. It isn't because the movie is actually bad. with that being said, it's hard to rank this movie because it literally has nothing to do with the rest of the series, other than having loose ties to the Druids concept and magical constellation stuff like that. So basically, if I just told you the cliff notes for this movie, it would sound something like this. Someone steals a piece of Stonehenge. They use the magic from this piece of Stonehenge to power up devices that they put into children's masks and that are set to basically kill these children the second they hear a commercial airing on national television. And they also use robots/androids to carry out the mass production of these masks, and they also kill anyone who may uncover the conspiracy. So that's just the basics. And a lot of normal people would say that sounds like a terrible movie. But it really isn't. It's bananas. It doesn't make any logical sense in many parts. Like, why do snakes and crickets appear when the masks are set off? Is that really more of a disturbing effect than, I don't know, making the masks explode? Showing children's heads explode on film? Maybe that would be just as dramatic. I don't know. I'm not sure. But the thing is that with all the insanity set aside, this has the makings of a really good movie, thanks in large part to an awesome synthesizer score and an atmosphere of mystery and suspense that no other Halloween movie really has. And it has nothing to do with the slasher genre that the Halloween franchise helped to build. Even if it had been executed perfectly, though, it likely never would have done what it was set out to do, which was to establish an anthology-type franchise that would leave Michael Myers in the past. Whether the creators wanted to continue the story of Michael Myers or not, if anyone wanted to make a movie that used the Halloween name, it was going to need Michael Myers. I will say, though, that Silver Shamrock jingle sure was catchy, though. Also, full credit to Darcy the Mail Girl for getting me to give this movie another chance a while back, and therefore getting this movie to move up on my list. It was at the very bottom of my list for a very long time, as I wrote it off completely at a young age. The 2018 Halloween movie essentially reset the Halloween timeline by telling audiences to ignore all of the sequels. Only the original actually happened, and that's a decision that I am not a fan of because Halloween 2 wasn't that problematic, and it introduced the fact that Laurie Strode is actually Michael's sister. In fact, a character in the movie even asks Laurie's granddaughter if Michael was her grandmother's brother, and she says, no, that was just something some people made up to make them feel better about themselves. Which, I don't know why that would make anyone feel better. But the reason that deleting Halloween 2 is so problematic for me personally is that without Michael's continued slaughter that night, where he made it clear to Laurie that he was this unstoppable force, and without any family link, Laurie's character is annoyingly over the top to me. There's really no reason for her to believe he's coming after her again, and the fact that she was proven right because she had to be proven right narratively doesn't make it less overdramatic. I mean, so much of this movie is eaten up with the family drama between Laurie, her daughter, and her granddaughter, that it really would have made more sense for Michael to be part of the family, you know? The same character who brought up the brother thing in this movie also brings up the fact that, by today's standards, what Michael did really isn't all that noteworthy, vicious, or evil. We see worse things all the time. But the response to that comment by that character is to, shut the fuck up, Dave. So I'll just shut the fuck up. Actually, that isn't the only time in the movie that Dave is told to shut up. A kid tells him to shut up as well. And now that I think about it, Dave is clearly supposed to be the cynical smartass avatar of all the cynical smartasses in the audience, like me. That at least adds a Scream-esque element to the movie that I never really thought of before, but it also definitely doesn't pull that off the way that Scream did. This movie itself is good, though, better than I'd actually given it credit for the first time I watched it, and the callbacks to the original were a really nice touch, too, such as listing Michael Myers as the Shape in the credits, having the original Myers actor Nick Castle back behind the mask in a scene or two, the nice role reversal between Laurie and Michael in the fall out the window scene in this one, the inclusion of a closet scene, etc. They're all well done Easter eggs for longtime fans. And even though the sequels are not supposed to have ever happened, there's plenty of Easter eggs for those as well, including the replication of the gas station from Part 4 and the children's masks from Season of the Witch. And coming in at number 5 for me is Halloween Kills, and there may be some recency bias with this one since this movie was literally just released and all. But Halloween Kills was more enjoyable than I expected it to be going in. And again, take into account the fact that I didn't really like the first movie as much and had a lot of problems with it. At least here, Michael just gets down to business. It also introduced a different concept, the concept that the townspeople of Haddonfield, particularly those who survived or who had family members who survived the events of 1978, standing up and banding together against Michael Myers to try and put an end to his evil as a sort of trauma-bonded family, I guess you'd say. Of course, as most trauma-bonded families do, things usually devolve into a dangerous mob mentality, and yeah, there is the obligatory "now we're the monsters" line, but I can overlook that, especially when there's this many stabbings. It was particularly great to see Kyle Richards reprise her role as Lindsay, the little girl from the original, whose babysitter and Laurie's friend Anne was murdered in 1978. That is the same actress playing her as an adult. A couple other returning actors from the original are Nancy Stevens as Marion, and Charles Cyphers, who played Officer Brackett, Annie's father, in the original. Also, in a few of the flashback scenes of Michael Myers, Nick Castle, the original Michael Myers, is back, and he does don the mask once again. Wow, it's not very often that you're going to see at least 5 different actors reprise the roles that they played 40 years ago, is it? That's like legendary love letters to the fans type of stuff going on there. I highly recommend watching the 2018 movie immediately before this one as well, because you will pick up a few great details that you probably won't pick up otherwise. For instance, in the first one, Laurie's daughter's husband, Ray, tells a story about how one young character's dad used to sell him peyote. But in this one, that character, who supposedly sold him the peyote, Lonnie, actually plays a big role and tells the same story the exact same way, but with the roles completely reversed, that her dad was the one selling peyote and embarrassing himself. I'm going to stay away from major spoilers on this one since this is still a new movie, but I think they tried to go a bit too big at the end, and as a result, it became too corny and contrived. I'm all for, Michael Myers becoming even more of an unstoppable juggernaut. And by the way, the kills throughout this movie are impressive. And I'm all for him being further defined as like a non-human manifestation of evil. But we all knew that this was not going to be the last movie coming into this one with Halloween Ends already announced. So knowing that this was going to be a trilogy, I don't know, they went too big, and now I don't know where they have left to go after this. It seems like it's going to need a time jump in order to make sense, but I don't think a time jump really would make sense either. Future concerns and nitpicks aside, I did enjoy this movie quite a bit, as is reflected in the rating here. And at number 4 on my list, we have 1981's Halloween 2, which picks right up where the original left off. Michael Myers has scurried away after being shot multiple times by Dr. Loomis, and Laurie Strode is taken to Haddonfield Hospital in order to be treated for her injuries from the night he came home. And while this is a good movie, and it introduces one of the most important plot points of the entire franchise, like I mentioned earlier, that Laurie is actually Michael Myers' younger sister, it's also where a lot of the narrative starts to go off the rails. Loomis, in particular, begins his descent into full-blown madness as he keeps yelling, "I shot him 6 times! 6 times!" Even though you heard 7 gunshots. Can't blame him there, though, because the gun he's using does only hold 6 bullets. And Loomis in this movie will straight up pull a gun on anyone wearing a mask that even remotely looks like Captain Kirk. Laurie's treatment at the poorly lit hospital is also a problem for me. It doesn't make much sense, and her injuries pretty much just come and go when convenient. I think she might have died from an allergic reaction at one point, or at least she went into a coma, but then in the next scene she's up and walking around. It's weird, and it establishes that convenience and circumstance, not logic and character development, is going to be the real driving force in the narrative from here on out for this franchise. After everyone in this severely understaffed medical facility, although in their defense, maybe they're not understaffed because there are no other patients aside from a few newborns, and also a groan-inducing child with a razor blade stuck in his gums, because 80s. But once everyone in that understaffed hospital are disposed of, we get a lackluster final showdown between a blinded Michael Myers, a cut-up Loomis, and a gimpy Laurie that leads you to believe that at least two of those characters decidedly dead, but of course, they aren't. I will say that this one probably has two of my favorite kills in the entire franchise. The therapy tub scene, and no, it's not for the boobs, it's for the flakes of skin coming off of the actress's face, I swear. It's not the boobs. And the scene where Michael just lifts an impaled nurse up off the ground with one arm. Good stuff. And at number 3, we have Halloween H2O, a title inspired by the fact that the movie was released in 1998, exactly 20 years after the original. It does not have anything to do with launching a new bottled water line. I've already made it clear that I'm not really a big fan of the Laurie Strode character in the new trilogy, and I don't think I'd say that I'm a huge fan of her in this setting either, but I would certainly call it an improvement over the new trilogy. It makes a little more sense to me. And basically, this is another one, though, that did reset the entire timeline. Here, all of the sequels without Jamie Lee Curtis were eliminated, which, again, is a better move in my opinion. So, basically, Laurie went through one night of Halloween hell. Her brother she didn't know she had was presumed dead, but his body was never recovered. And 20 years later, we find that she is now a teacher at a fancy boarding school after having faked her own death and taking on the new name of Carrie Tate. She also has a son named John, played by Josh Hartnett, who goes to said school and just recently turned 17. The rest of the cast includes Michelle Williams as John's girlfriend Molly, Adam Arkin as Laurie's love interest, Jamie Lee Curtis's real-life mother Janet Leigh from Psycho fame, and a small but memorable role for Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Also, LL Cool J is the school security guard. He basically sits by a gate all day, but sadly never says the words, "Mama said lock you out." I would have settled for "your mama said lock you in," but he doesn't say that either. He just talks to his wife over the phone about a really bad erotic novel he's working on, and has a funny line about Josh Hartnett's hair. Obviously, I like this movie since it's ranked so high here, but I will admit that it was probably better in 1998 than it is 2021. And at number 2 on my favorite Halloween movies list is Halloween 4: The Return of Michael Myers. And after making the terrible decision to not have Michael in part 3, The Return of Michael Myers pretty much had to be the title of this movie if they wanted this film to have any chances at success. Because Jamie Lee Curtis had already decided that she didn't want to do any more horror movies for the sake of her acting career, the choices were to recast her or to introduce a new character that could carry on the Strode story. And so it was decided that Laurie Strode would have a daughter named Jamie, who was given up for adoption when Laurie was killed in an off-screen car accident. This movie is higher on my list than it's going to be for most, I think. I think Danielle Harris is great as Jamie, minus a few wooden lines that are honestly to be expected when you're dealing with child actors or even many of the adult actors in this franchise. Ellie Cornell as Rachel provides one of the most likable and relatable characters in the franchise, and actually, I kind of like her better than Laurie. And Loomis is a little more likable than in part 2, but still a nut. This movie also has a few of my favorite scene setups in the entire franchise. I love the scene where Dr. Loomis hitches a ride with a drunk driving preacher who is somewhat of a kindred spirit to Loomis by this point. He's a madman in search of evil, in search of the apocalypse in his case, and no one takes him seriously. Donald Pleasance plays that scene perfectly in that you can see that Dr. Loomis sees himself in this man. Also, the rooftop escape and the final chase scene are both great, in my opinion. And the shocking final scene, where Jamie appears to have become the next vessel for Michael's darkness, is very well done. And the idea of having the primary victim become the tormentor isn't an entirely original one. I mean, it happens twice in the Friday the 13th franchise, but this is definitely the movie that executes it the best, in my opinion. And some of the credit for that actually has to go to Donald Pleasance as well, as he's great when he sees Jamie in the same getup that Michael was in so many years ago. And my favorite Halloween movie is the original from 1978. And did anyone really think that number one could be anything else? Like so many other franchises, nothing manages to really touch the original. This 1978 movie is a true, legitimate classic, and for good reason. Not only is it a great movie, but it paved the way for so many other horror icons, especially Jason Voorhees, considering that so many felt that the Friday the 13th franchise was just a blatant ripoff of Michael Myers and this movie. This movie also holds up better than most, for sure. Though I will say it's a bit comical now, considering how many gunshots, explosions, and everything else that Michael Myers has basically just shrugged off. To see him, thoroughly slowed down by a knitting needle. Coat hangers slow him down as well. But seriously, he is legitimately disabled for a couple of minutes in this movie by a knitting needle. I don't know, maybe he was just tired though. I mean, he had killed several teens by that point already, and it had been 15 years since his last activity of any kind, so maybe you gotta cut him a break. This one sets up the origin story for one of horror's most iconic figures, Michael Myers. Of course, if you know anything about it, he's a 6-year-old boy who snaps with no clear reason why and brutally murders his older sister. He spends the next 15 years in a mental institution in a catatonic state with no emotion, no remorse, no explanation for his crimes, and soon his doctor, Dr. Loomis, becomes convinced that the boy is not human at all, but rather just pure evil beyond all reason. But after 15 years, Michael suddenly has come back to life, escaping the institution and weaving a path of destruction that leads all the way back to his childhood home in Haddonfield, Illinois, which just so happens to be across the street from the house where 17-year-old Laurie Strode is babysitting little Tommy Doyle. And the William Shatner mask fits in there somewhere. It's not really clear. Again, this is a classic with some of the most memorable scenes, such as the ghost scene. I love Michael Myers pretending to be Bob, wearing a sheet with glasses on his head. Also, the closet scene, of course, is legendary, and the acting in this one is better than in most of the other ones still. So definitely check it out if you haven't seen it, but let's face it, if you haven't seen it, you're probably not watching this video. And that'll do it for my special holiday edition of Ranking the Franchise. I hope everyone has a safe and happy Halloween. And as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, and leave a comment below on what's your favorite Halloween movie.